Welcome and thank you for joining. My name is Melanie Betancourt, and I am the health educator for community health at Atlantic Health System. Today's webinar, LGBTQ plus Pride, past, present, and looking for the future is presented by Sonia O. Ron. She is a bilingual program manager, legal advocate, manager of Casa Hispana program, and DASAC and works at DASAC of Warren County. Before we begin, I have a few announcements. This webinar is being recorded. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button and the use of the chat feature for comments. We will try to get through all the questions at the end of the presentation. Are you or a loved one interested in smoking cessation? Atlantic Health System offers a free quit smoking program. This program includes an individual assessment, free nicotine replacement products, and 6 weekly group meetings to help you quit and stay smoke-free. There are multiple dates and times available, with groups available in person or virtually. For more information about these groups and other resources for additional dates and times, please call 1-844-472-8499.
So thank you again. And this is the history of the movement on LGBTQIA+ and why it matters today. There will not be a magic day when we wake up and it's now okay to express ourselves publicly. We make that day by doing things publicly until simply it's the way that things are. This is a quote by Tommy Baldwin. He is the first openly gay senator in the United States. So a few important things to start. For members of this community, we are even confused about how to correctly identify ourselves sometimes. Over time, the acronyms for this community have changed, and this is just in the past 25 years. The community's identity changes reflect the history of the movement and the increasing need to include people's different sexual and gender identities. The reason this has become so important is because the history of this community has always been about equity and equality. Basically, the struggle to be given the same rights as any other sexuality and or gender. Stonewall. While the riots at the Stonewall Inn in New York City is largely recognized as being a pivotal point in the gay rights movement, it is not the first. Many of these things that the 1969 riots, as you know, is something that people come to and recognize, but it's by no means the first thing that happened. So before Stonewall, let's talk about a little bit about that. Members of the LGBTQIA+ community have formed their own social and civil rights groups, which were part of what is called the homophile movement, starting in the early 20th century. These are just some of the groups that formed starting in 1924 and leading up to Stonewall. Most of the groups were regional or state groups, however, and there was a lack of national movement. This is a flyer distributed by the Medellin Society dating back to the 1950s. And I always find this a little humorous, so I like to share it in my presentations. So some key moments before Stonewall. In 1924, the Chicago Society for Human Rights, its first LGBTQIA+ rights group, formed in the United States. In the 1960s, members of the LGBTQIA plus community began to publicly protest in a desire to fight for equality and equity. Many of these groups were inspired by the Black civil rights demonstrations taking place around the South in an effort to be seen and to non-violently protest their rights. In 1965, Philadelphia sit-in at Dewey's restaurant. The restaurant had denied service to anyone who seemed to be gay or gender nonconforming. First 3 people who participated in the sit-in were arrested, which led to more people coming to participate in the sit-in over the subsequent days that followed. In 1966, sit-in in New York City, Julia's Tavern, it was actually legal to sell alcohol in New York to anyone who was openly gay. So people came in, declared themselves gay, and waited to be kicked out. These sit-ins resulted in the state's anti-gay liquor laws to be overturned. Again in 1966, Compton's cafeteria riot. The protests about police brutality by drag queens and transgender people, which resulted in the formation of the National Transgender Counseling Unit in support of transgender people. The plaque in the picture that you see here sits at Compton's cafeteria today to remember this important event in the LGBTQIA plus history. So back to Stonewall. The Stonewall riots began in June 28, 1969, when police arrived at Stonewall Inn for a routine raid. Police in New York City were cracking down on LGBTQIA plus bars. During these types of raids, customers would try to make a run for it. And if they were caught, they were arrested and essentially outed as being part of the community. Rather than run to avoid arrest, people at Stonewall fought back against the police. This led to a 6-day riot with thousands of protesters arriving to support LGBTQIA plus rights, a turning point in the gay rights movement. Stonewall was the start of the gay liberation movement. From this event, national organizations such as the Human Rights Campaign, the National LGBTQ Task Force, the Log Cabin Republicans, and Lambda Legal were formed and still exist today. It was a result of Stonewall that the movement began to gain national momentum. So after Stonewall, let's talk a little bit about that. On June 28, 1970, Gay Pride Parade. 1 year to the day after Stonewall, the first Gay Pride Parade was held in New York City. While the end of June started as a series of Pride Days, the month of June evolved into Pride Month. For last year's Pride Month, President Joe Biden stated the following in his official proclamation. He stated, during lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex Pride Month, we reflect on the progress we have made as a nation in the fight for justice, inclusion, and equality, while reaffirming our commitment to do more to support LGBTQIA plus rights at home and abroad. I often say that America can be defined by one word: possibilities. This month, we celebrate generations of LGBTQI plus people who have fought to make the possibilities of our nation real for every American. In 1974, Elaine Noble was the first gay person to be elected a state senator in Massachusetts. In 1979, the National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. This marked the first time there was a national march of LGBTQIA plus rights in the United States with more than 1,000 people in attendance. In 1981, the AIDS epidemic. When the AIDS epidemic hit the United States, it quickly became known as the gay plague because so many gay men were dying from it. Anti-gay activists used this as a platform to try to reinstall anti-gay legislation. This video, this is a video of a White House press conference in 1982. It demonstrates the attitude towards AIDS at the time. People laughing about despite the fact that it was quickly killing thousands and thousands of people in the United States. This attitude and the support of politicians to push the anti-gay rhetoric slowed the moment of the gay rights movement tremendously, devastating a community that was already dealing with unprecedented deaths from an unknown virus that would not be understood or taken seriously for years. And I think that that video speaks for itself in the way AIDS was addressed initially. Um, this slide, Matthew Shepard, it's the hardest slide I find that I talk about. It's something that happened that was so critical and so vital and touched so many. And I always have ask you to bear with me as I go through it. Matthew Shepard, on October 7th, 1998, Matthew Shepard, a gay student from the University of Wyoming, was brutally assaulted and murdered by two men he'd met at a local bar in Laramie, Wyoming. They beat him with their fists and tied him into a fence, then hit him in the head several times with a bat and left them unconscious. When Matthew was found, he was initially mistaken for a Halloween scarecrow and had been beaten so badly that he was unrecognizable. Matthew Shepard never regained consciousness and dies on October 13th, 1998. He was 22 years old. This becomes one of the most well-known instances of a person being killed because they were gay. Because of international news coverage, this brutal crime shocked the nation and inspired a renewal of LGBTQIA plus activism in the country. And as I mentioned, after the video and then this slide, I find that when I'm about to do this presentation, I have to go over speaking about this young man to myself over and over again because it's that emotional for me, even still after all these years. And the fight continues. In 2015, Overfell versus Hodges. It's a Supreme Court decision. In this case, the U.S. Supreme Court voted 5-4 that to now allow same-sex marriages, couples, the right to marry, and violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. This mandated that states must allow that same-sex couples to legally get married. Well, this is important, an important step forward. Look at how closely that decision was. Out of 9 people voting from the Supreme Court, only 5 of them voted to allow for same-sex marriage. Today, in 2023, the people on the Supreme Court are much more conservative, which puts decisions like this, like abortion rights and other rights to protect other marginalized population at risk. Despite the amazing successes in striving for equality and equity, the LGBTQIA plus community continues to have to fight for the rights guaranteed to all in this country. I hate to be political, and really, I'm not trying to be, but I think that President Biden expressed this the best in his proclamation making June 2022 of last year LGBTQIA plus Pride Month. He stated, "Today the rights of LGBTQI plus Americans are under relentless attack. Members of the LGBTQI plus community, especially people of color and trans people, continue to face discrimination and cruel, persistent efforts to undermine their human rights. An onslaught of dangerous anti-LGBTQI plus legislation has been introduced and passed in states across the country, targeting transgender children and their parents and interfering with their access to health care. These unconscionable attacks have left countless LGBTQI plus families in fear and pain. All this compounded has been especially difficult for LGBTQI plus youth, of which 45% of whom seriously considered attempting suicide in the last year. A devastating reality that our nation must work urgently to address.
Thank you so much for joining us. We kindly ask to take a few minutes of your day after this webinar to complete a program survey. I put it in the chat feature for you guys to read. The link is added for your convenience. A special thank you to Sonia for dedicating her time and expertise on today's presentation. If you have additional questions, comments, send an email to, like I said, communityhealth@atlantichealth.org or call 1-844-472-8499. This concludes our webinar. Have a good, beautiful day.